to the last day of the Wallaby PTG for Cinder. So just a couple of things on the Etherpad. If you'd like to give feedback about your overall PTG experience to the teams that has organized things, there's a link to Etherpad that you can put some comments on. And then for your Cinder PTG experience, instead of putting together a poll or something, you can just add comments at the bottom of the page. If you want to be anonymous, just open up the Etherpad in a private browser window, and you'll have a different color, and I'll have no idea who's leaving the comments. But it'd be good to get some feedback. I mean, I put some suggestions there, but you know, put in anything you like. It would just be, we'd like to try to improve the experience because it's sounding like we're going to be doing virtual stuff. We'll do it for our mid-cycles, of course, but it's the impression I'm getting is between like social responsibility and you know, worldwide pandemic, we're probably looking at another virtual summit PTG for the next round, and who knows, right? So any suggestions you have, you know, please write them down. It would be, yeah. So like some feedback about the hallway time thing. So I tried to do that, but we've been meeting with the Glance team and that's run over. So the last couple of days, we didn't actually have our hallway time. So it'd be good to know if that's just a waste, we shouldn't bother to do it, or if there's, maybe we should do it at the beginning. I don't know. But if you have any suggestions, please add them, because it looks like we're going to be living with virtual meetings for a while. Yeah, so on that one, on that note, I should just say, hope everybody's doing okay, like human being wise. And okay, now we can get to business. So I've got a link there to the Wallaby schedule. So you can take a look. I've got the Cinder specific stuff is on there. I think I mentioned this at one of our meetings, but I tell you, to be honest, I can't remember. I went ahead, usually I don't post the Cinder specific dates until after we've discussed them at the PTG, but as soon as the feature freeze happened, I was getting questions about when you could start merging changes and when the driver deadline was. So I went ahead and put all that stuff on here. So I picked reasonable dates, but we can change these if we do it soon. So please take a look. So the spec freeze is happening slightly early because I wanted to get it done before everybody, a lot of people are going to disappear around Christmas time. So we're doing that slightly early. Everything else is pretty much at the same time it happened in Victoria, except the cycle's a little bit longer, so things might be spaced out. So as far as the mid-cycles go, so this is up for grabs. I mean, what we've done the last 2 cycles at least is had, I guess there's probably a better name than mid-cycle, right? But we've done 2 meetings, 2 virtual meetings. I'm trying to remember what the format was. I meant to look that up. I think we did, was it either 2 3-hour days or 2 2-hour days? I can't remember. So we can discuss the exact format at the, at Cinder meetings. But I wanted to get a rough idea while everybody's here, or at least get you to look at what the proposal is, and then we can talk about this at the next Cinder meeting. So I'm thinking the first one so in Victoria, the first one was a week before the spec freeze, which makes sense, gives us time to and have people ask questions, go over what's looking like it's going to make it. So this time that would be at R18, so it's December 7th. So that's what, like 6 weeks from now? No, it's, well, 5, it's pretty soon, but you know, time moves on. And then the second one would be the same thing. It would be 4 weeks before feature freeze, which is the same time as the client library final release. So I think that's a good time to just give people feedback on features they're trying to finish and do a check-in to make sure any new feature that requires client support is, getting some attention. So that would be the week of February 8th. So that would happen at R9 again. So anyway, we'll talk about it at the Cinder meeting, but that's roughly what I'm thinking. So I could use feedback in terms of whether we want to do this, which I think is probably yes, and the dates. So just so you're aware. Okay, and then that's pretty much all the business. So then the next thing would be any second thoughts about what we've discussed so far at the PTG that anyone would like to bring up. And while you're thinking, I'm going to update the PTG bot. All right, yeah. So if there are any holidays, so notice Gorka noticed, so he's got, so Monday and Tuesday would be out for that week. So if anybody else, please check your schedules to see if you have any holidays, because that would be a reason to move this.
Well, I'm sure I could move my holidays to take PTO next week, the week after, or something like that. So it's not a deal breaker or anything.
Right, but
It's
it's good
just
to know. I mean, especially if somebody else has like Thursday and Friday, right? So yeah, so please check your calendars, and then we'll talk about this at the next Cinder meeting um, to actually set something. Okay, so no, so how are people doing? I mean, I'm getting kind of tired, even though it's not as bad as being at the physical summit. Seems to be, by Friday you're pretty exhausted from, jet lag and stuff, but I'm just tired from being in my basement. Okay. All right. Well, if we got no second thoughts, we can look at the removing deprecated encryptors. Um, I don't have much to say about this. I don't know if, and I should have scheduled this on like the first day when Lee Yard was here. So let me update the PTG bot. Oh, and since Jay's not here, I better start taking notes in Etherpad. Okay, so if you look at the OS brick patch that's linked there, so these, or you probably know this better than I do. I believe these encryptor names are stored as part of the volume type. So when you create a volume type that has an encryption type, that's where this stuff is showing up. And then Brick needs to know what to do about it. So the class names were deprecated to use legacy provider class. Anyway, we're trying to standardize these. And I guess the question was Lee's question on the things. Lee thinks that we may need to do a database migration to correct the names if we're going to remove this legacy provider to current name map. which makes me wonder if it's really worth. Oh, I see. So okay. All right. So, okay. Sorry. So the problem was you used to be able to use out of tree encryptor classes, and we don't want to allow that. So we deprecated doing that and then assigned the official names that you're supposed to be using for encryptor classes. Um, so I'm not sure. Maybe we need to postpone this to Cinder meeting. I guess my question is, do we need to do the database migration? And if we do, it might be easier to not do it and handle it here.
I think we may need, because if you look at the Cinder patch,
Okay.
you can see in the volume utils change that we were modifying the provider to support the legacy. So this is something that was coming from the database. In the database model for encryption, we have a provider field. So we would need to do the mapping there and replace the old with the new. So everything is in the new format and we don't have to keep changing things in the code, and probably raise an error if there is any out of tree encryption mechanism that we allowed before.
Okay.
That probably should be the first check in our migration code.
Okay.
You know, like before we start if we make this change for the next release, the first patch we have to have is one that tells you if it's going to break here. So that way you can stop at the beginning and you don't have a migration in the middle, like 20 migration in the 10th, this happened, and suddenly you have your database in a middle state. So we should have a check first saying, hey, oh, we actually have now checks, a tool to check if there are going to be problems. So that's where we need to add it. Okay.
So you're thinking the upgrade checker. So we can do the upgrade checker. Okay.
We need to add it there to make sure that the migration is going to be successful. And then add the migration as well. Yep. I think Lee is right about it. And I think it should be, the migration should be included in Cinder, in the Cinder patch that's there.
Okay.
Because it's the same thing.
All right, so we'll need. Now on the Nova side.
Just one last question.
Oh, sure.
Isn't the dependency the wrong way, in the wrong way? Oh, no. Yes, me. Yep. It's correct. The dependency is correct. Sorry.
Okay.
Go on.
So, okay. So I'm just thinking in terms of OS Brick gets released, right, roughly around, I don't know, R minus 6 or something. So if we actually make the change to brick, we're going to have this period. Well, it's only going to affect you if you're running out of. I don't know what I'm trying to say. All right, everything's got to be coordinated for Wallaby release. So the brick change and the cinder change, and then if they need to, one and Nova, have to happen in the same release. Because once we remove the stuff out of brick, Nova and Cinder, would encounter these things, would have a problem. But that's okay.
I think if we add the check, upgrade check,
Mm-hmm.
I think it all comes down on whether the operator doing an upgrade is doing the things right or not.
Right.
Because I think that check should be run even if you're running just updating to with master or whatever, because we may introduce changes. So as long as that is there,
Okay.
it should be safe. We have that, and we can make the Cinder change, the migration.
Okay.
And then as soon as we do the migration in Cinder, the code in OSBrick is no longer being used. The code is still there, but it's
Right.
not being used.
Okay.
That's why the dependency OSBrick depends on Cinder and Nova no longer using that
Okay.
thing.
Okay.
So I think if we add the check and we add our release note, making sure that people know they have to run the check, and also explicitly say this new check, the check we have added is for this specific case. If you don't have that, then it's going to be fine. Otherwise, you won't be able to update.
Okay. All right. Then that sounds good. Okay. So that. All right. So Lee put the -1 on that for the. I'll just leave a note on the patches saying he's right. We need to do the migration, but we want to add an upgrade check. And then we should be okay. All right. Great. Any
just a note.
Oh, sorry.
Yep. Yeah, an observation. So yes. There are still a few users which are using the old names for the old classes around. So this shouldn't. Maybe it's not going to affect those patches, but we may break something. There are no many of them. You just search for Lux encryptor, for example. You should. Maybe there are some stuff in Git. Rally and a few other, not many. Most of the things have been already fixed in the past. I even fixed a patch in Tempest and one in Barbican Tempest client, Tempest plugin a few months ago. But just to be, that's more for Lee probably, just to be aware that we may break something when we merge those patches. But I mean, that's not a reason to block them. It's just we may need to do another. Double check that all the users have been really removed.
Yeah, we have to use the Hound tool to check all the repositories and make sure that nothing is left true.
Okay. All right, thanks. That's good. Okay. All right, if there's no further, wait, let me check the chat. Oh, okay. Oh, thank you, Luigi. So Luigi did the live search while we're sitting here. Thank you. Okay. All right, next item is Gorka, improvements to service down. Give me a second to update the PTG bot on the chance people are watching for this.
Sure. Should I start? Or because I don't think anybody's going to be coming just for this. So this relates to a more generic topic that maybe we end up discussing about health in monitoring and things like that in OpenStack, specific to Cinder and volumes. And the first thing that I realized that I think I had forgotten is that our services only appear as down when you check the status of a service if it didn't initialize. So on the start, we get a call to check if the driver has initialized properly. If it not, we don't report and it will appear as down. And the other case is if we cannot do heartbeats on the database. Those are the only two cases where we can see a service appearing as down. This means that if RabbitMQ there is no connection in RabbitMQ, the service will not appear as down. And for synchronous calls, which are not so many, basically is initialize connection and terminate connection, I think. Those are probably the only two synchronous connections that we have. For the rest, when the client makes a request or Nova makes a request, the operation will just stay in a transition state, ending if ing forever, because it goes to RabbitMQ, and if the Cinder volume service is not, or the scheduler is not receiving it, we don't know. We just know that it's in ing. We don't have a way to tell what happened there, if the services are really down, having problems with RabbitMQ, or if the problem is between the volume service and the backend. You lose the connection there, and everything at least will go to error state. That is at least an improvement. But it makes it harder for an administrator to know that the cloud is having a problem, for one, because they have to receive a complaint, hey, all my volumes are going to error, or nothing is working, basically. Or they have automated their own code to every period of time, try to create a volume and delete it, just to make sure that everything's are working. That is an inconvenience, but I think it is also a problem for active-active, where if one of your nodes has problems, but the other two don't, 1/3 of your requests are going to fail. And that is going to be harder to figure out what's going on. You're going to have to look and see who is handling all the requests that are failing and see, oh, it's this node, of course. And maybe then the driver already knows that it is having problems accessing the backend. And it could automatically say, hey, I'm going down, or mark me as down. I have no access to my backend, and provide meaningful information. So my concern right now, instead of trying to make it super fancy, maybe it's just for a way for the drivers to let us know if there's something going on there, if there's something wrong. And I think there are multiple options. One, I think, would be for the drivers to be able to change, initialize in their driver, either be it a property or they have a periodic thread that changes the status of their variable initialized, and the manager checks it and updates the status of the database. Or we implement a new health mechanism that provides more meaningful information. So that it's similar to the user messages, something that tells you, okay, the problem is RabbitMQ, the problem is I don't have access to the backend, or I'm getting, I don't know, something the drivers may know. And in this regard, in terms of the health, maybe we can leave it for later, but at some point we may want for the drivers to be able to report health status of the array. For example, is it degraded? It may still work, and users may only see a performance reduction, or not even a performance reduction, because everything is still working, but the array is telling you, hey, for example, one of my batteries died. So if I lose the other one and the power goes off, a problem or whatever, some health that the arrays are currently reporting. I think that's probably a broader topic. So maybe we can just focus on letting drivers tell us, hey, we're down, and a reason why they are down. So something like that. What do people think?
So off the top of my head, I think we could tackle the RabbitMQ. I'm thinking we should sort of split it in two, sort of the way you've outlined. So we can do the Cinder side stuff independently of the drivers giving us more information. Because that'd be a good start to at least see if we've come up with, we get some feedback from operators about whether this is helpful. Because
well, it's not only about helpful. In the active, it looks kind of bad.
Yeah.
If that service keeps listening, because one of the problems is that when the driver tells you that the service is down, we have to close the cluster message queue connection, because we are distributing via a single queue, which is the cluster queue. So if all the services, the 3 services are connected and one is down, it has to actually close the connection and not do anything in there, or not receive requests. And for the RabbitMQ part, it could be a not complicated piece of code in the API, because we currently have, we can add a new mechanism, which is a synchronous call, to just say, hey, are you there? Are you there? Or something like that. Or we can use the existing API to get the Cinder logs levels. We have a mechanism to say, hey, give me the Cinder log levels, and it's one of the other synchronous calls that has no side effects. But I think it's probably best an independent check via RabbitMQ, because that can be extended to get health information as well. So I would like to hear, if possible, from people what they could, if this was implemented, if I wrote a spec, what things would they like to see handled by this? Like, for example, yeah, I would like to be able to send a message to an administrator, to a system administrator, not to the project administrator, to give them some instruction, error code. I don't know what it could be helpful for each of the different vendors to have there.
Hey Gorka, Michael here from the PowerMax team. Yeah, this does sound like a good idea. I mean, once we initialize our PowerMax driver, we do some environment checks ourselves. So we test connection to our management server. Then, you know, we obviously check that the arrays that we're using are the right code level. So we have different generations of array. You know, we only support, for example, Bmax 3 and newer. So we check to make sure that the array that we're pointed at is the correct model. So we just propagate this back to the user in the Cinder volume logs if this doesn't, if their environment configuration isn't correct. But I definitely see what you mean, where it would be useful if we could pass that information further up the stack to the UI and say, this is the problem, you need to fix it here, instead of digging down into logs. Another idea then is differentiating between management server issues and volume backend array issues. So like you said, you'll have problems with active-active. So say if you have three arrays sitting, but only one of them is given issues, you could say, right, your management server is fine, arrays A and B are fine, but array C is not fine. If you could have some way to, have more granularity than just the Cinder volume service is down, you could say your Cinder volume backend array is down. It's this one, and kind of put the onus on the driver.
We currently have that. You can, because you can either request the cluster information and you get three of three are up, or 2 of 3 are up.
Mm-hmm.
If you query the service list, you get individually each of the services if they are up and down. So you have that, but that information, the information you're saying we would get from the driver, should be individual for each of the different services and not globally wrapped into the cluster level. Yep.
Yeah, well, I think, it's, unless you can see a way to make it a one-size-fits-all solution, I think if you could pass back that your back-end array is initialized working fine and your management server is working fine, I think from a PowerMax perspective, that's, 2 thumbs up from us, and then we'd be ready to proceed then with volume operations. Mm-hmm. So like I said, we're ready to do these kind of things, but, it's just ourselves in the logs, we don't pass them any further.
And so what about during runtime? So just start and everything looks good, and the system, for whatever reason, is degraded because the power went off, because one of your multiple power sockets is not providing power. I don't know. Half of your disks have gone dead. Things like that. Would it be helpful to be able to also do that runtime?
It's not difficult because of the management server we interact with. The REST API there has a very robust alerting section, so we can go to the alert endpoints, check, does my primary array have any warning, critical, or error alerts? If so, we can pass that back then. And then it could be the case where we could say hard drives have failed, maybe some of your PSUs have gone down, batteries are having issues, so you could pass that back if we wanted that level of detail.
Yeah, or maybe, like you say, that's maybe too much detail and you already have it in your system. So maybe you just say, hey, you have 2 critical alerts in your system or something like that.
We're in favor of that one because, if we could tell the user there is a critical alert, but I think ultimately to find out the most detailed and best information about that, they should be going to the management server. If there's a critical alert on your backend storage array, you just want pointed to say, go and fix it. And, so we would use Unisphere to then to further diagnose that alert. Instead of trying to pass it all up to OpenStack, just say, go to your management server and look at this now.
Yep. Okay. So we have the... Yep, sorry.
I think that if I ask our customers whether they need this functionality, they will probably say yes, but currently probably they are using some automated mechanism like IPMI to report if something goes down. But I agree that also reporting for OpenStack operators would be nice. And a question I have is if we ask all the drivers to implement new method like check if the backend is alive. Probably not all the vendors will implement it so quickly. So the default behavior would be if the driver does not have it implemented, we assume that it's alive. Would it be the right approach?
That could be one approach, which is probably the easiest and probably the one I would go with because it's easy. The other could be to check how many issues, how many requests are succeeded. Like it's been 1 hour, 100% of the requests coming through this node have failed. It's unlikely for that to happen. So at least issue a warning, like service seems to be degraded. We don't put the services down because I think that should be something that the drivers tells the manager to do. Like, hey, I'm not fine, mark me as down. But we could mark the service as it has a warning. Similar to the case that we were discussing about the array saying I have critical warnings, critical alerts. The service is still up, it's working, but you have to go check what's going on. Similar here, instead of going to the array to see what's going on, you first would come to a Cinder volume and see why there are so many errors there and why nothing is working. So we could start with this implementation, which is sure, everything is fine if the driver doesn't tell me anything. And maybe I could look into improving it a little bit for those drivers that don't implement this. Okay. That's an interesting, yep.
Yeah, I don't think that's not as fail safe as it might be. So we have management server failover built into our PowerMax drivers. So we can specify per backend, X amount of management servers. So if we have an issue with our primary, we transition over to the secondary, and it's it happens live during a request. So we would watch out for connection errors, timeout errors, your standard request library exceptions that come back. And if we hit those, we'll fail over to a secondary management server and we'll just proceed with the request. And if it's just a problem with the management server, then everything seems okay. But with that point that you're just putting down there, how many requests have failed in the last X minutes, we could have no failed requests, but have 9 management servers down, and we're on our 10th management server, which is our last one, if that makes sense. So just thinking of a scenario where that might be problematic.
Yeah, but in your case, if you want that extra information,
yeah,
you would have to implement the new feature, which is a specific driver call. This is for drivers that don't implement the new feature, or the new method.
Oh, right. Okay, I get you now.
If of course that cannot be done generically for all drivers because not all drivers have that facility. But in your driver, if you want to start marking and reporting, you could do it with the other mechanisms we've mentioned before of saying there is something degraded in the storage. Please have a look.
Yeah, I like that. I like that you could set a driver status as degraded. So, if our primary primary management server goes down, but we're working fine on the second, we could say, something's going on here. Backend's degraded, working, but it's degraded. You might want to go check it out. Yeah, Sounds good.
Okay. And maybe we could also squeeze in here a replication health check of not the failover, but okay, I can talk with the secondary. I'm not doing any operation there, but at least the secondary seems to be up. Because, I don't know, maybe that could be, or that could be optional and the drivers could decide whether to report that or not. We can just document it and say, hey, drivers may give you this may want to give this additional information, right? We don't force it, we just suggest it for drivers.
Yep, it sounds good. I think it's something that we would make use of on the PowerMax driver as well. Now, if that was there, we would use it.
Okay, this clearly will require a spec, so I will write one of the options in the spec, either have a field to say the status of the replication, the connection to a replication, or just add documentation to let driver developers know that it could be a good idea to also report if there is a connection issue with the secondary nodes of the replication. Well, so I think since we would want to have additional information, just using additional information just using the initialized variable or would not be good because we cannot get additional information there. And initialize has a very distinctive meaning. Initialize is whether you could start the first time. So if you have problems, it has nothing to do with your initialization. Those are different things. So I think there would be new methods to implement by the drivers. Okay. Well, I think this was productive. Anybody else has any suggestions?
Yeah, I see what you mean about, not these sets, you might run these initialization checks whenever the volume driver loads, but like I said, months down the line, if you encounter an issue, unless you're reinitializing your driver, you won't hit these problems. So would it make sense maybe to try and encourage lightweight calls, lightweight periodic calls, the same way you update volume stats, but say run them once an hour, where you could say report back on your replication ports in your R2 array and your R1 array, or report back on the status. So it's an hourly periodic task instead of just on initialize. Mm-hmm. But obviously put warnings to the driver operators to say, this is going to run periodically. You don't want to make it too expensive because you could have an impact on user environments. Try and keep these periodic checks as lightweight as possible.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So then,
yeah. And we can make it configurable for that same reason, so that vendors, because some vendors may say, yeah, but this is expensive operation for me, like with the stats. So I would suggest my users to increase the time between calls.
Yeah.
So, that definitely sounds like a great idea. And because right now, yeah. Okay. I will add it to the spec.
Perfect.
Well, I have nothing else to say really.
Okay, that sounds good. We'll have another spec to look at soon.
Yep. Thanks, everyone.
Okay, let's. Next item is to review some. There are some changes and some specs that have come in that I'd like us to look at. Okay. All right, so this first one, so there was a spec proposed. So let me back up. So I think I mentioned this yesterday or the day before. We have, right, so we have various statuses that we expose on resources, so in particular volumes, so that you can track what's happening with your volume, right? At some point, in order to implement something, some extra fake statuses were added. Well, I don't know fake, but some extra statuses were added to track some management stuff that we didn't want to expose to the users. So what happens is in the view for the API, when you look at the volume, there's an automatic translation done. And the problem that this person encountered was that you do a volume list and look at all your volumes, and you see the ones that are in error state. And then if you do a filter to only look at the ones in error state, the number's different. And it's because some of these management things are being translated, but when the filter was operating on the database, it wasn't picking up those. Okay. So the problem is, I think it's really a bug because those internal statuses should not be exposed. We don't want people directly interacting with them. So I think these are bugs, but I don't know what I'm saying. So the spec is still out there, so I imagine we should just reject the spec. I mean, the other thing was I lost track of this because the person did react to the comments on the spec that this is really a bug and then put up a patch. But I guess, yeah, so I guess what I'm saying is we need to review this. I think we want to do it in a back portable way because I think there may be a case in which we're actually exposing these things and we shouldn't be. So I'd like to, that's what I'm saying, I'd like to hide those again before people start actually using them, because they shouldn't have access to these states because the volume should never be in them. So that's where the backporting will get kind of tricky. If somebody's written a management tool that somebody has figured this out. But I guess we just deal with that when it I don't know. Does anybody have any feedback about that situation? Because now you can do a volume list and you can query on these statuses that are not listed in our official status table in our documentation, but you can discover them. And then I guess the other Then the other complicating factor is in terms of operators, if they look in the database, which we encourage them not to do, but sometimes you have to, you're going to see these weird things in there that aren't actually volume statuses. So I guess it's sort of a two-pronged thing. So we want to make sure that these internal statuses are not being exposed to end users, but at the same time, we need to document for operators that they exist, but I don't know.
Could we go to what Eric suggested 3 years ago and get rid of all these intermediary statuses and error is error? Now that we have a way to report through the user messages that the error is because it failed to delete, it failed to do this. So from the user perspective, they can get enough information about what that error means. And internally, we can track this some other way. The status is error, and if we need additional, we have a sub-status, whatever we want, but the status is always error, not 100 different kinds of error. Because I don't know if that makes sense, if we should look into it, or if we should just fix this now, which makes sense, to just do this thing, and the other is a later conversation.
Right. Yeah, because it's like Nova for instances the instance has a status, but then there's a task state also that's exposed depending on, that gives you more fine-grained information about the particular status you're in. So we could do something like that, but that would not be back portable.
It would also probably in the future remove a lot of bugs because we keep adding similar error underscore whatever, and suddenly we forget to add it to places in the code where, I just saw one of those cases where I have to fix. It's in the NFS driver, the vanilla NFS driver, where you're checking for one status, but then a different status was added, I don't know, error underscore whatever, and suddenly you cannot do backups of a snapshot you cannot do backup of a snapshot if the volume is NFS, and all because of this status that we keep adding. So it could be a kind of incremental kind of thing. We get one type of error deleting, we change it to error, we add the extra field. So we do one at a time. We don't try to change everything. Simple ones, error deleting, then error managing deleting, then things like that. Probably best. For this one, you mentioned that in the database they would see a different status. I don't think that's a problem.
Okay.
We can just mention it in the contributor documentation.
Okay.
Single sentence saying to the users, these statuses are changed, are mapped to these others, and we're good. If somebody does a search, they will find those weird statuses and they will figure it out. Looking at the patch, I don't know if anybody else is looking at it. I have a question. I haven't thoroughly thought about the issue, but when in the database layer, there is a change where it says if model equals volume, whatever, if key is a status, if value is error, it says that it should not, it filters out the error managing deleting. Why is that? What is special about error managing deleting? Oh, I see. Oh, but this, yeah, now I understand what. Yeah, whoever wrote this is fixing a bunch of bugs, and probably this is part of the cleanup mechanism when you restart the service and you have error managing deleting. In deleting, you want to group them so you can retry a delete. Okay. This patch is going to make fun the cleanup code I want to add. Yeah, because if I query for creating to complete the operation, suddenly I will get also managing volumes. Okay, I can filter them out, not a problem, or I could try to manage them again. Okay, not a problem. So yeah, I think we should just, you're muted.
Sorry, I was giving you all these profound insights that I've unfortunately forgotten. No, I'd asked him to split it into a bunch of bugs, so I'm wondering if I should still. All right, I just need to spend some time working on this. I felt bad because, you know, we discussed this, I don't know, like in the middle of the summer, and then this developer was very nice about not shouting in the Cinder channel, review my stuff, and as a result, I didn't realize he'd made the updates till after the feature freeze. And I didn't want to get any kind of database stuff merged.
I don't think it is such a huge patch or such crazy code that we have to force a split. Probably we can review it and make it happen.
All right.
I will have to go to the bugs to make sure that there is not one that stands out from the other and that we wouldn't want to backward or anything like that. If we would want to backward everything that's in here, I think we can probably just
keep it together. So make it, yeah. Okay. All right. Yeah, what I need to go through is make sure he's addressed the right. Okay. So mainly I just want to get eyes on this. I think we should try to merge it early to get it out of the way before too much stuff happens. Okay. So we don't need so it's a bug, don't need a spec.
Yeah, we can abandon the spec and just say we are going to review the patch, fixing it.
Okay. All right, any observations or comments about that? Okay. Next one up. So we've got, these are kind of weird. Okay, yeah, Eric, go ahead.
I've looked into this topic before. We need to just reject both of these.
Okay.
So these are asking for a feature at the API to say, I want to delete a volume and write over the data to make it securely deleted or something.
Right.
A lot of backends, you have no idea if you even can do that. And none of this defines the threat model they're trying to protect against. Are they trying to protect against an admin or somebody with the storage backend recovering data later? If so, you probably can't. Are they trying to protect against another tenant creating a volume that has old data in it? Well, that has to be done anyway, whether you pass in a safe delete flag or not. And if drivers aren't doing that, they're broken. So I think what we need to tell people is use volume encryption, and that's pretty much it. Because there's no feature in these that really makes sense to achieve an actual goal that I can see.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing. I mean, because if you don't trust the back end to do this, then passing a flag saying do this isn't going to really help you. So you either have to use an encrypted volume or you've got to just wipe it yourself before you delete it.
Well, you don't even know if you can wipe it yourself. I mean, if you have some copy on write backend, you don't know what that does. So it doesn't matter. Like so the problem is if you want to have a spec that says I want to securely delete something, you have to spell out the threat model and how it works and what it actually protects against. And I think if someone actually does that, they'll realize why we don't have this feature, because it basically doesn't really make sense.
Could I add it into the interfaces delete method to spell it out for vendors? Like, for security reasons, you need to make sure that blah, 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 blah. So, like you said, if the backend is not doing it, it's broken. So we make sure that if their backend is broken, they somehow do something about it in the Cinder driver.
Yeah, so this actually came up. The reason the LVM driver has a clear operation is because if you have thick provisioned LVM, you can create an LV and get data in it that was in some other LV that's just sitting on the disk. In most backends that we support, that doesn't happen because they have some kind of thin provisioning layer that zeroes everything out, so you never see that happen. But if there's a backend that literally will just hand you random bits off of a disk that you didn't put there, then that is a major security problem that they need to address. I would assume that that's a pretty rare situation for the kind of stuff that we support, but people do need to know that when they're developing a driver. And there is a paragraph or two in some driver documentation in our tree somewhere that I wrote about this a while ago. I forget exactly what format and which thing it's in, but it is mentioned somewhere in our driver developer notes.
Okay. All right, maybe I'll look for it and maybe we can surface it in the contributor docs or something or somewhere. I mean, I guess this is a question for operators when they purchase their back end. I guess to what extent this is supported.
It's in contributor drivers.rst does mention that you have to delete volumes in a way where you won't leak data into new volumes. I don't know how much we need to get into explaining how to actually do that.
I was just thinking of making sure that it's in the interface that we are file that we're trying to improve the documentation and try to get everything we can explicitly in there. That's what my action is. Basically, copy what you already have and put it in the interface.py file. Could you write in there, Eric, the location you just mentioned, please?
Oh, okay.
You already found it.
So that's fairly clear.
And I don't know, we maybe need to specify somewhere that we don't really intend to protect against the threat of like, you've deleted a volume and then someone physically steals your storage array or something. Like that's just not a threat model that we even consider worrying about. It's really about never exposing data to another OpenStack user that you have deleted. But we don't actually have any functionality that tries to like securely delete a volume so that no one could ever recover it. It's just not something we try to do.
Right.
If you use encrypted volumes, you can get most of the way there by virtue of deleting encryption keys, but then you're still relying on whether Barbican actually deleted it and whether the HSM actually deleted it. And it, you know, it's
Right.
there's too many layers to really guarantee anything.
Okay. Yeah, so okay. So we could maybe mention
As a side note, there's still some motivation from this, among many other things, saying that we should really just completely get rid of thick LVM. We just haven't done it yet.
I'm sorry, we should get rid of
Thick provisioned LVM.
Oh.
It has terrible performance, and there's no reason anybody would want to use it at this point, but it's still there.
So if we want to deprecate thick provision LVM, would we? Gorka, you're making some faces there, but you're muted.
Yeah, because I didn't speak. No, the faces is not because I think it's a bad idea. It's because always deprecating something takes forever. It's mostly about that.
Right. Well, we got to start at some point, but
should we ask if somebody is actually using this, the thick provision, and if someone really cares about it?
Well, the default has been thin for years, I think. So it would really have to be somebody like opting into it. And I don't think there's any sensible reason to actually do that. So I hope there's not really anyone actually using it, because I don't really know. The only way that would happen would be if they deployed LVM like 7 years ago and then never touched it.
Could it be useful for testing purposes? So sorry, I just jumped back and I missed part of the discussion.
Well, I mean, testing what? I mean, it's really just a minor like config difference in how the LVM driver works. So it doesn't really test anything in particular because it's still just the LVM driver, just in a different mode.
Eric, by the way, I just realized that we default to thin if it's supported, right? That's the auto, not that we default to thin.
Well, well, it's been supported on every OS anyone cares about at this point for a while. But because when we first introduced it, some version of Ubuntu that was in the wild, I think, didn't support it. Or it was there, but it didn't work right or something. Okay. We also have feature checks in the LVM driver around doing things on sufficiently new versions of LVM. And if we really wanted to, we could go into the whole just require a new enough version to not have all those checks. But it just has never come up enough for anyone to bother worrying about it.
Well, it seems like if we want to get rid of the thick provisioning LVM, we do have to deprecate it first, and then remove it. So we can do that.
Yeah, I think it would be totally reasonable to add something that just throws some warning messages to people that are using it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, and also if it's an option, then that's easy to, right? You get the message in the log and everything. Okay. Do you want to do that, or do you want me to do that?
I can do it. Yeah, I'll do it.
All right, cool. Okay. All right, any other comments about that? So we're going to update the delete stuff, and then we'll deprecate thick provision LVM. Sounds good. Okay, next one is support revert any snapshot to the volume. I know Gorka's left a lot of comments on this. I just left some comments last night, but and I think there's something we should discuss about this. So if you can open up the patch. Eric had left a comment on one of the earlier patch sets, and it never got addressed, and I'm kind of concerned about it also. So the situation is for drivers that don't implement a convenient backend way to revert to any snapshot, we will implement a manual way to do it in Cinder, but it's likely to have pretty serious performance impact. So question is how to handle that, because operators might not want to expose this feature if, right, it's going to degrade their whole cluster.
Yeah, I mean, my assumption, I think, in what you're referring to was that if you have a backend that doesn't really have an efficient way to do this, and then we implement something that shovels a bunch of data all over the place with DD or whatever,
yeah,
you can achieve this same feature, which honestly, for some use cases, like that would be great depending on what your actual requirements are. But you have to kind of understand that you're losing all kind of copy on write space savings, and you're doing a bunch of IO, and operations take a little bit to happen, and it's not like a trivial thing to just do. And what that looks like is going to vary depending on the backend you have.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it was suggested by Brian to have, by Eric first and Brian, the configuration option. Something in the lines of, I think, could be only support revert to intermediary if driver supports it, or only efficient middle revert to a snapshot, whatever, something like that. So, but one of the things I'm in favor of that. I just want to remind people of inefficient migrations, drivers, when you clone that do exactly this, they attach both volumes and they just delete the data. So we have cases where this currently exists.
Right.
I'm okay with, I'm actually in favor of adding the configuration option.
Well, and I think there's more subtleties to it on understanding the requirements from the driver too. I mean, you have to, even if you have a driver that can revert to snapshot 3 in a chain of 10, does that also mean that you can revert to, so you can revert to snapshot 3 and then run there? Can you later then revert to one of the newer snapshots in that chain or not? And there's a bunch of questions like that that aren't obvious to me how they're going to actually behave on different backends. And so if any driver owner is implementing this, they're going to need to know what the whole list of weird scenarios is that they need to consider and test and know how they perform.
So you're thinking you revert to 3 out of 10, you do some stuff, and then do a snapshot of that?
No, so if you have like 10 snapshots and then you revert to 3, which means you're basically running on snapshot 3.
Right.
Is it guaranteed that you're going to then be able to do a revert to like 7 and go forward again? Like, I mean, that's the premise of doing this, is that you would expect that that would work. I don't know if that would even work on all backends, like without just going and testing a bunch of them. I mean, it should, but it's kind of different from what we normally do.
Should we change, and instead of having just a flag of, yeah, you support this, to ask the driver on each specific revert to a snapshot, hey, can you do this revert? And the driver tells you sure or no, right? Because maybe they are 100% sure on some reverts, and on some others they don't know, or they think that it may fail. I don't know, whatever. So they can dynamically say on each case what they want to do. Would that be a solution, Eric, to the problem you're describing?
Well, what do you do when they say no? You just reject the...
Well, it depends. It depends on the other configuration option you suggested, which is, should I do an efficient revert to a snapshot? If they say no and you are allowed to do inefficient, you do inefficient and you just replace everything in there. And if that is disabled, then you fail because that specific revert is not supported by the driver. And of course, one thing that we should do, and I don't know if we wrote it here, is have a user message for this if we fail and we don't want to do the revert.
Yeah, and yeah, that's all good. Another thing that I don't remember if it was in the spec because I haven't actually looked at this in a while. I think currently, if you do like snapshot show, it doesn't have like a parent snapshot ID, does it? Because it just assumes that they're all in linear time order. But I think if you do this, you may actually want that
branch,
because you end up with a tree of snapshots and no one from the user API can tell how any of them are connected to any others. Which, I mean, maybe that's okay, but if it has different implications for like what you can delete, and I don't know. I'm wondering if we need to show that to users. Like if they now have a tree instead of a line, do they need to be able to see that tree or not? I don't know. Some of these questions were why we didn't do this the first time around, because we didn't want to figure out the answers to all of these questions.
I think exposing that information to the user is probably not a great idea. Another thing is being able to store it for the driver to make use of it. I think that's probably a good idea, even if it's in the form of supporting metadata, driver metadata in the snapshot like we do with the volumes.
Yeah.
But exposing this to normal users, no. To an admin, yeah, probably okay.
Well, just for a point of reference, I think, if I remember from years ago when I did a bunch of VMware stuff, I think you can actually see a whole tree of snapshots in like the VMware snapshot system. So I'm fairly sure that, that is a concept that's out there. Whether it's actually useful in the Cinder case, I'm not sure.
And then should we also have a tree of volumes for the drivers that have copy and write?
Well, as long as they can actually be independently deleted, you don't need one. So once we fix that, then no.
That's a good point, though.
I guess that should be one of the things about driver implementations of this revert thing, though, is to make sure that you don't introduce things where if you revert to an older snapshot, you can no longer delete newer ones. I mean, currently the expectation is that if you have a Cinder snapshot, you can just go delete it, regardless of what order or anything. And we need to probably tell driver implementers that we're expecting that to still be the case with this feature.
Can you say that again? I'm sorry.
So I think we need to state a requirement to driver owners implementing this, that we still expect that snapshots can be independently deleted, so that when you revert to an older one halfway through your list of snapshots, you don't introduce some kind of dependency where you can't delete half your snapshots until you do something else. Because I suspect that certain backends may run into problems like that. I don't know for sure how common that would be, but I think some will probably have things to figure out there.
Yeah, and spelling it out, like you say, probably will help them at least think about it and consider it during the implementation. Yep.
Right.
Good.
Okay. So then in terms of, I was thinking in terms of turning it on or off. So we'd have a new micro version that would allow revert to any snapshot. And then if the option did not allow that, we'd just we wouldn't block the call. We would just return.
User, it would change to error, and you would, or change to available, I don't know, error probably, and just state that
And the
in the user message. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, no,
No
we don't.
changes have. Sorry.
Well, we don't want to change. We don't want to change the volume to error. We just want to not do anything.
Right. But somehow we gotta. So I guess, well, we'd have that, since it's a configuration option, we would know that right at the request.
Nope. Because we were talking about making it a method, not so that if a driver can, you tell it, I want to revert from 10 to 3. It says, okay. Now I say I want to revert to 7. It says no. So some may be possible and others not.
And we
To
won't know
be
that
able to support that, we don't know until
later.
So
Okay.
we know it for drivers that say, no, I don't implement it. In those, we can fail fast.
Okay.
Say no. For the others, we could do a double call, first a synchronous call to check if the driver would be able to do it. From the API, you check,
Right.
Can you do it? And based on that, you return, okay, we're going to do it, or not. If you're going to do it, you can just make the actual call and return everything okay. If not, you don't make the call to the driver and just report the error. That's probably the best implementation.
Right. So we want that right at the REST API layer. You get a definite response. Yes, I'm going to try to do it, or no, not at all. Okay.
Yeah, but
From a user's perspective, yeah, no.
But what we don't want to do is have them ask for the revert, and then in the case where it's rejected because the driver can't do it, we don't want to set the volume to error while it's in use, because that's just going to make sense of everything. So the tricky part is that you basically rely on the user message stuff to tell the user this happened, I think.
I just changed it, the idea, with a synchronous call to the driver.
Okay,
The
well, if it's
API
then yeah.
Okay.
makes a synchronous call to know if the driver is going to accept it or not. To prevent what you say, we don't want to change it to error because reset a status is an admin only action. Yeah. But yeah, that's a great point, that we want to be able to tell the user without changing the status if it's going to be accepted or not. And if the driver says that it accepts it and then fails, then yes, the volume goes into error because we don't know what happened there.
Right. Okay. All right, so that will complicate this. So Eric, you've been talking about this for a while. You would like to see more here about some of these scenarios, about how exactly.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really good feature. I just think that if we just land a spec that says, let's go do this, all the driver implementers are going to go stumble into a big mess of weeds that is, seems kind of predictable if we think about it up front.
Yeah, I think what's happened is somebody has a back end that does this and just wants to expose it. And so as far as they're concerned, everything's fine.
Unless they haven't thought of the weird scenarios that Eric mentioned. Revert to 3, revert to 7, revert to 4, revert to 3, spawn, create another snapshot, revert to the previous 5. Revert.
I mean, even in a less weird one, I mean, If you have 10 snapshots and you revert to 3, and now you're running there, you have to still be able to create snapshots from that point too.
Right.
So just because you can revert to a previous point in your chain doesn't mean that you necessarily can create a new branch of snapshots in that chain. But that's going to be the expectation for how the Cinder API works. So that's another case where, like, anyone implementing this has to test this and know what's going to happen in their driver. Because you might be able to revert to snapshot 3, and then you fail when you try to create, snapshot 4B on a new chain of snapshots, depending on what your backend actually can do.
Okay. All right, my indentation on this has gotten kind of crazy, but I'll fix that later. Okay, so basically, things to think about. All right, so our official position on this is it seems like an interesting feature, but
I do think it's actually a really good feature.
it just needs more careful thought to, right. I think, okay, so the point, I'll leave a comment on the patch. I guess the point we want to make is that in proposing this, we have to think about the effect on all drivers, not just the one you happen to be working with. And that's what's really, I'll ask them to help out the other driver maintainers by giving some scenarios and how things are supposed to behave. And then that works. All right, I better write that down because I'm going to forget. So of the people here who are representing vendors, I mean, how many of you have this functionality where this is not going to be a problem?
Yeah, I think we're okay, Ryan, in the Paramex
Okay.
driver that we can do it, yeah.
I need to take a look on the documentations because I'm not sure.
Okay. All right. That would be good to know in terms of well, I don't know, I'm just thinking in terms of if the performance impact is so bad that nobody's going to want to turn on the generic revert, and we need to use it in a lot of cases, then that's kind of not good. I don't know, but as Gorka pointed out, we do have other situations where we do non-efficient things, and
I mean, it's useful enough that a lot of end users would want to use it, even if it took 5 minutes to do it.
mm-hmm.
So whether admins actually want that to happen is a different question, but
Right. Okay. Okay.
I just added the -1 to the spec because I understand the spec doesn't need to go too in details, but on the testing side, there was just add unit tests and add functional tests, and I believe that's a bit too, not enough, especially given all everything we discussed so far.
Okay, thanks. That's very important. All right, cool. Any other observations or comments about this one? Okay.
Well, it's a good segue into the next topic there.
Yeah. So this is sorry to do this to you, Eric, but I was digging through our the spec patches, and this is still this is still a good idea.
Yeah.
We're just looking for somebody who's interested in taking it on. So
yeah, I still firmly believe that we should do this. I just have not gone and done it yet. Basically, the proposal here is to have an API that will let well, there's a couple of situations. It could be there's a use case for admins where an admin says, I want to write some extra specs. I have no idea what to put in them. Tell me what this backend can do and what kind of fields it's going to actually, consume. The other aspect of it is you have an end user that says, I want to do a revert to an arbitrary snapshot. Is that a thing that this cloud will even let me do? And it's, I don't know. I think we should have a way for people to determine answers to these questions, because it's useful for a whole bunch of stuff when Cinder clouds or Cinder deployments behave differently depending on what you're running them on. So
one question to that, would the user ask the questions, would be an admin or a user or an end user, the one asking that question?
I don't know. I think the spec that I wrote up was targeting the admin case because that was the easier one to go after.
Okay. Yep.
I think there are totally sensible reasons for users to do it too, but I haven't gone and tried to write that up in the last year and a half.
Yeah, mass complaint was going to go on that line. If the user can ask that, they would have to ask with a specific resource or a specific volume type. Otherwise, we are exposing backend information because you have 5 different backends. They cannot just ask, can I do this? Because the answer is depends.
Yeah.
Yeah, for admins, it will be really, yeah.
So one of the user cases is can I attach a snapshot? Some backends can do that and some can't. And you could have an API that could answer that question if you wanted to.
But we don't expose that API, right?
I don't know. I thought we did. I'm not sure.
Officially. I mean, the client cannot do it, as far as I know, the Cinder client.
I don't know. Maybe that's not a good example. I'm honestly not sure. I assumed that we did expose it, but I don't know. I don't use it, so I'm not sure.
Okay, I will check it out of curiosity.
So Eric, I went through the spec and in the work items it says many. So do we want to discuss any specific work items on this?
Well, I guess we need to determine what the first target would actually be. So if we assume that the first target is let admins at least get information so that they can figure out how to write specs, I mean, that's an actual use case that someone can aim at, and we could figure out how to do that.
Because right now, to write the extra specs, you have to look at the driver documentation, I guess, right? And then
yeah, you just have to look at docs and code to figure out what they do. Yeah, so one of the examples was there's a number of volume drivers that will respond to a volume type that says turn on volume compression. but you don't have any good way. If you're an admin and you're like, I want to make a volume type to make compressed volumes, you don't have any way to even tell which backends do it and which ones don't. And then even if you know that your backend does it, you have to figure out what the field name is that it actually responds to and the capabilities. And
in theory, don't the drivers report those in the stats, and don't we get that information with Cinder get pulls that does details?
you get the fact that compression is a field that is some semi-standardized field in Cinder, but I think it always shows up regardless of what backend you even have, if I remember correctly. It's been a long time since I looked at that. Because there's a Cinder client command you can run that will print some of this stuff out, but what it prints out basically is independent of what you're actually running on your deployment.
Okay, I see the
tell you
problem.
compression false, but that doesn't tell you if you could actually make it true.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
And it's reported as like a defined volume type field, whether you have a driver that actually does it or not. So it'll tell you, sure, compression is a field, but then you make a type that tries to use it, and it may not do anything if you're on a backend that doesn't actually implement it.
Well, it should fail to create that volume if the scheduler is doing it right, because any feature that is, any capability that is not being reported by the drivers assumes it's false, and it would not match. But regardless of that, the truth is that that is no way to figure out things. Create a volume type, see if it works. If it doesn't, you don't have that. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm trying to remember, I think there are some that are filtered at the scheduler and some that are not, but I forget exactly how that works.
Okay.
So if you look, like, I just pulled up like the Nimble driver because I just searched for it.
Okay.
And there's an extra spec key, Nimble : dedupe, Nimble : encryption. Like, you have no way to discover that stuff other than just reading the code or documents.
No, those are reported to the scheduler. But then again, you don't know if the specific array, because that's the driver support. You don't know if your configuration supports it, which I believe it's the problem.
Is this something that you could tie into what you were talking about earlier, Gurka, about reporting back array capabilities on initialization? So in addition to status, you could report back capabilities as well. So you have all those whenever a driver loads. You know if it's compression capable, if it reverts to snapshots capable, simple true false flags there.
Well, I think this will probably be a different method, because the other is health related and this one is regarding the capabilities that are reported on the stats, which ones are actually supported. So I think this will go in a different method.
Mm-hmm.
Looking at their code in that driver, I'm not sure it actually is reported to the scheduler. I think those are just consumed in the driver.
Yeah, then probably it's because they didn't implement after we added the report capabilities to the scheduler thingy.
All right, so I think we continue to agree that this would be an excellent thing to be implemented. I guess if no one's interested in tackling it during the cycle, maybe we could flesh out some of these points.
Yeah, it would be good to get a spec that has more info about how this actually works put together.
All right, so maybe the driver vendor who would be interested in this, you don't have to worry about the implementation, but it would be good to see some, like, what a example response would look like, or how you could visualize this working, and then it'd give us more to work on in figuring out how to implement it. So just something to be aware of. Any other comments or concerns? Okay. All right, next item is just there's a patch up to replace MD5.
So I was helping with this if we need
Okay.
context. Basically, so Python, when run on a FIPS configured system, which is, I don't even remember what it stands for, but it's like super secure mode for your Linux system to meet some FIPS government certification, basically bans usage of MD5 in the Python library. And so if you call hashlib MD5, it just says this doesn't exist anymore. Mm-hmm. And the security guys are fixing this so that you can actually run Cinder on a FIPS configured machine. So the way that this was implemented in some versions of Python and in Python on RHEL was that they added a flag where you could basically use MD5 if you passed in a flag that says, I promise I'm not using this for security related hashing concerns, and then it would let you do it. So they have duplicated that concept into an Oslo method, where basically if you pass in a thing that says, I'm not using this for security purposes, just do it, it will work. And so there's a bunch of places in Cinder that use MD5s. The prominent non-security one that I am always familiar with is when you mount a volume, when you mount an NFS volume with the NFS driver, it wants to generate a random like place to mount it. So it takes the export IP and path and like MD5s it, and then it makes a directory that's just that MD5 sum and it mounts it there. Has nothing to do with using MD5 as a hash. It's just using it as like, please give me a string that doesn't have any characters in it other than hexadecimal characters. And there's a bunch of other places in here that do this. And there's one or two places I think where it's actually used, like in some kind of, I think it's used for some hash digest stuff in the Swift backup driver, but most places it's used for fairly innocuous stuff. But basically, this patch goes and converts all the places that called the hashlib MD5 and uses the Oslo utils version. And I think we're supposed to audit this and make sure that we know what to do if there are places where it's actually being used for like an HMAC or something. Is the goal is to not do that. So the commit message even mentions like two places that it was used for security purposes. I don't know what was actually done for those. Oh yeah, we have a driver that implements its own whole like AES cipher with key derivation and stuff like that. That's a nightmare that we probably should have never merged, but that's one of them that showed up in this patch.
Okay. All right. Yeah, it was. I'm glad they put that into an Oslo library because yeah, the last time I looked at this, the problem was upstream Python did not want to have this kind of FIPS mode because they don't recognize it. So this way we can have, it can be fine for us. Okay. All right. Thanks for explaining that. So we just need to go through and look at it and review and raise questions. The one thing, so Adi said in his commit message, he couldn't find the bandit config. And I couldn't either. I guess we just run bandit in default mode. Although I must admit, I didn't actually try to run it.
We used to have a config, I thought, but maybe we don't anymore. I haven't used bandit in a while.
Yeah, I haven't either. They had one release that just broke a lot of stuff, and then I just never used it again. Anyway, if someone's interested in digging into that, it looks like we have Tox jobs set up to run Bandit, but I don't know if they're.
I think in the
exactly
rare. Yeah, well, they just scan for all the default stuff, and I think in the rare event that they add a new check that we fail, we just go patch it so that they keep moving along. It doesn't come up a lot, but every now and then it will detect things.
Okay. All right, so this is probably another thing we would like to get merged early, just to get out of the way.
Yeah, I think the review of it's pretty easy. I mean, basically what's going to happen is in the places where it says used for security equals true, you boot a FIPS configuration, those drivers just aren't going to work.
Okay.
And maybe that's just how it is. I mean, you know, if it's only a couple of them, maybe no one that ever is going to use FIPS is going to use those drivers anyway, so it doesn't really matter.
Okay. So yeah, it'd be up to the driver maintainers whether they want to be FIPS compliant or not. Okay. Well, I can take an item so for any of the drivers where that's the case, I'll just contact the driver maintainer and make them aware of that. And then I guess we'd want to note that somewhere, or I'll wait till this is actually an issue and then figure out how.
Well, we should probably put a note in the driver contributor docs that says if you're going to write a new driver, just don't get anywhere near MD5, because if you're writing a new driver, you probably wouldn't do that anyway. But
right. Okay.
I mean, the assumption is basically that MD5 is going to kind of not be there at some point. And I would like to fix this on the NFS driver, which we could totally do, but you have to write a bunch of code to like handle a running deployment that's mounted stuff to MD5 paths and make sure you move to a new one. And it's solvable, but it's not, you know, trivial to do. You can't just change to a different, you know, SHA because there's an upgrade step that has to happen. So if anybody wants to fix even more stuff in the NFS drivers, this would be another item to consider.
Okay, any observations about that one? Okay, so it seems pretty straightforward, so that's good. Okay, I'm gonna be selfish.
We may also want to add a note to contributor docs that says don't implement your own encryption code.
We actually do say that somewhere, I'm positive, but yeah, maybe I need to put up a patch that makes it bold. Bold italics. But I'm positive I've seen that in there. Maybe I saw it in the driver review. Anyway, yeah, double check and make sure that that's emphasized. Okay. All right, since we have some time, this one's kind of selfish because it's something I've been working on. So we've got this set up. So it's possible for Glance to use Cinder as a place to store images. And then since they're already in Cinder, there's an optimized code path you can use if you make appropriate, configurations so that Cinder will know that, hey, I've already got this. And if you want to have a bootable volume, I just clone the volume because I don't need to go get it from Glance and write it out to this volume. Now, so anyway, so that's the thing. So I wanted to write a test to see if this was working, because there was a change in Glance that changed the format of the locations. So I believe that we would not be able to read them, and so stuff should crash and burn. But fortunately, Cinder is pretty resilient. And what happens in this case is that it tries to do the quick thing, and that doesn't work. So then it says, okay, so then it goes ahead and downloads the image from Glance and continues. So as far as you can see from the API, everything's working fine. So I'm trying to figure out how we can test this, because there are messages in the logs, so we can look manually, but it would be nice to have, so anyway, we have this optimization code path. It would be kind of cool to know if it actually is being used when you turn it on. So I don't know whether, I think it's probably bad practice in Tempest to try to grab log messages and see what's happening. So I'm because what's nice about this is everything's happening the way it should, but presumably if you were running in a big big deployment or something, you're not getting the optimization that you expect, but you've got no way to know that until you look at the logs to discover that it's never actually doing a clone in this situation.
The problem I see is that you either check the logs or you check your storage to see who the parent is of your volume. In RVD, you would check, is the parent, blah, blah.
Okay.
But without some kind of looking into Cinder, you wouldn't know, because that's something that Cinder tries to hide from users.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah. Okay.
But I understand the point of, but then admins should get some kind of warning. Like, you thought this was working, it's not.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost like you want some kind of place that you could cache away data when these operations are done, so that an admin could query later and see, did I do 50 optimized operations or 50 slow ones, or was it like half and half? And
right.
that's a whole infrastructure to build to figure out how to do that. But it kind of has some ideas for like performance